All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming out for GovCon this year under these difficult circumstances. As if it wasn't difficult enough dealing with COVID, working from home, and doing all this remotely, my laptop died at about 3:30 p.m. yesterday. So I'm doing this from an old 11-inch Chromebook, single screen, no second screen for my notes. So this is like, level difficulty 3.5 from the judges on this one. So this is drag and drop content management for government websites. This is not the session you thought you were coming to. Well, you're stuck here now, so I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, so your speakers today, I'm Chris O'Donnell. I'm a digital strategist with Promet Source, and then about a third of the way through, I'll be handing it over to Aaron Couch, who's our Director of Technology. And this, of course, is the obligatory single commercial slide we get to do. Who is Promet? If you've been in the Drupal community at all for any period of time, you probably know who we are. We were founded in 2003. We've been doing Drupal exclusively since 2009. We're headquartered in Chicago, or at least our mail goes to Chicago. We've been a virtual company for years. So at least in that sense, the craziness of this year hasn't impacted our operations too much because we were already all working from home. Now we just kind of continue to do that. We've launched hundreds of Drupal sites since 2009. That's about all I'm going to say about us. Normally this is where we say we're hiring, but actually in COVID land, I'm not sure we are this year actually. Okay, so wouldn't it be really neat if there was something out there that combined the ease of use of Squarespace with the flexibility and scalability of Drupal? There is, and we call it Drupal. Drupal can provide the point-and-click content creation experience that many want and might be experienced with from Squarespace or Wix, along with the extreme flexibility and scalability that we already know and love in Drupal. And hopefully you're here because you want to learn how this magic works. And so over the next 30 minutes or so, Aaron and I, and mostly Aaron, are going to show you how we do this at Promet and how you can also do it for yourself. So at a super high level, there are two components to our solution here. It's Emulsify, which is a Drupal 8 or Drupal 9, I guess now, theme, which is designed to be completely used in a component-driven environment. And Provus, which is what we call our internal open source Drupal Kickstarter that we've sort of stacked up with a bunch of reusable components and some very common content types that allow us to get a jump start on our projects. And again, everything we're talking about here is open source. So let's think high level for a minute about the stuff that a typical government agency might need today. Government agencies, and quite frankly, probably most private businesses too, are under extreme pressure to improve digital services across the board. They're trying to push more and more transactions and interactions online, partly because that tends to reduce cost and improve responsiveness, and also because, quite frankly, most of us would rather go online to renew our license than stand in line with the DMV. Of course, we could put stuff online and not make it more efficient and quicker and better, but that's a different session, so we're not going to talk about that here today. Everybody in government, and again, the private sector, is really expected to do more with less, and it seems like we're actually expected to do more and more with less and less. And we are all seeking the holy grail of creating content once and being able to publish it everywhere with no additional work. And none of this is going to happen without copious amounts of coffee. However, there are some challenges on our road to a highly scalable point-and-click site builder. Some agencies are wildly unique. They have missions or just internal systems and processes that don't really get replicated anywhere else. You might call them special snowflakes. What you are seeing in this image is a very simplified view of the content model for the Government Accountability Office at gao.gov. Their mission and organization are so unique, it would never really fit into any sort of CMS that came with a predefined content model or a very limited content model where you couldn't completely change things to what you need. And sometimes two agencies that you think are very similar are in fact very different. Here we're looking at talking about the Philadelphia Parking Authority and the New York City DOT. You'd think that they have extremely close missions and so you could kind of copy and paste or cheat off each other in terms of building content models. But the reality is they have very different internal structures, very different missions. And the content model we build for PPA is in fact not going to be particularly useful for New York City's DOT. However, having said that, the reality is that we do actually put a lot of the same things in most of the sites we build. I mean, all of us have built, mini Drupal sites, and almost every one of them is going to have a media gallery. We're going to have various lists of content that are being spit out in views or other ways from the Drupal database. We're going to have cards. We're going to have a search interface. We're going to have locator maps to locations or whatever it may be. We're going to have social media integrations. We can call all these elements components. And in fact, we're going to call them components for the rest of this conversation. Yeah, so the reality is that we're going to use many of the same things to build two very different websites. Here, we're expressing that idea as a Venn diagram because every presentation should include at least one Venn diagram. Now that I've said that, I kind of had to do this slide. So, the ideal situation. What if we had a CMS that was with a really flexible content model that could adapt to all the unique needs of everybody from a large federal agency down to a county in a state somewhere, but it shipped with a library of reusable components that will jumpstart your project, and it featured a really friendly drag and drop site builder interface, somewhat similar to what people might be used to from Squarespace or Wix. That would be really cool. So again, Drupal's great at content modeling. Drupal's great at users and workflows. Drupal hasn't traditionally been so great at the click-together website stuff. Wix and Squarespace are really good at the point-and-click website stuff. However, their back-end content models generally aren't going to be flexible enough for any large government applications or even large private industry applications. They typically aren't going to be scalable enough to deal with a large state level or large city or federal website. And the people at Wix and Squarespace have probably never heard of FedRAMP. And those are all going to be important issues, obviously, for a government website. So the reality is Drupal can do both. We can use Layout Builder and a component-driven theming system like Emulsify to deliver Wix or Squarespace-like site building experience within Drupal. So our approach to doing this is to use Emulsify as a theme, to use a sort of an ever-growing library of standard components and flexible blocks, Layout Builder right from Drupal 8 core, and we put these three things together in something we call Provus, but it's really just a Drupal 8 spin. And now I'm going to turn it over to Aaron, and he's going to get into the details of how we're doing this and actually do some show and tell.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'm grabbing your screen, and I'm going into presenter mode. Can you see my? Can you see?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Yep, we see
awesome. It. Thanks. So yeah, we're gonna go into our approach for delivering the type of experience that Chris described, and at the end we're gonna look at some of the other popular approaches in the Drupal community, and yeah, we hope by showing you the way that we've tackled this, we can help Skillshare around this topic and be part of a larger dialogue around delivering excellent experiences to government. Emulsify is a Drupal and WordPress starter theme that gives us a huge lift in building reusable components. Emulsify combines both a starter component library and Storybook, which is a tool for building user interface components. There are a number of component-based themes for Drupal. I've linked to some of them as well as other component Drupal theming resources at the end of the presentation. We've identified that components are key to successful website building. We need a theming approach that can deliver reusable components. Some of the problems with quote-unquote traditional Drupal theming include CSS and JavaScript selectors that are tied to their context. i.e. where they're put on a page or tied to their backend implementation, i.e. if they're rendered with views or paragraphs or other Drupal implementations. Without a component methodology, we can tend to theme for the page. The result is often assets that can't be reused across projects. Some solutions include adopting a component-based methodology for theming. Emulsify uses atomic design, but there are a lot of others out there. I've seen projects and groups successfully simply create a components directory and reuse the bigger types of assets that they build. That's what works for them. With a component approach, selectors are isolated and can be reused. It's also really helpful to have a component library tool like Storybook. Let's look at an illustration. This is a typical carousel component. I think there are a few of us that are waiting for these to go away, but for now they aren't. They're part of almost every web property. This is how many of us have tackled creating the front-end assets for things like this. As you can see, the assets are tied to the Drupal implementation and combined with other elements. I'd point out that they are not only tied to paragraphs, but the specific name of the paragraph. In this case, it's field multiple carousel. Reusing this is difficult if there are any changes to the data model. We'd also need to do a lot of copying and pasting if we wanted to bring this to another context. And for JavaScript in this instance, we've thrown it into a single JavaScript file, which makes it really difficult to reuse specific components. And we've identified that a flexible data model is something that we want to build toward. With a component-based approach, all of these assets, including JavaScript, CSS, and templates, are grouped together. The selectors only reference the elements in the template, so they are isolated in a coherent whole. What we're looking at now is a component-based version of a carousel that we've identified as a 3-item carousel. And we have the JavaScript, Twig, and Sass assets. In the Drupal template, in order to use this, we use Twig's ability to embed or include templates to render the component. If the backend implementation changes or we want to move it to another project, the component itself is not changed. What we were looking at is an example of embedding the previous component. In this case, changing the block type or backend implementation means embedding the same component in a different template. Emulsify uses atomic design, which is a popular methodology for creating design systems. Other popular ones include Pattern Lab. Atomic design breaks the site up into the smallest components, atoms, which are combined to form molecules, which are added together to create organisms, like the site header example here. The organisms combine to create templates and pages. Storybook is a tool for making user interface components faster. It is a React application that gives you a living version of the component library. Here's a live version that shows that integration. So what we're looking at now is a live version of Storybook with some of our components that we tend to use over and over. Here we have a banner component. One of the features of Storybook is that we can add settings like selectors that we can apply to our components on the Drupal side. There's also tools like accessibility checks, and we can do QA in terms of mobile and other desired quality assurance mechanisms. The data for the Storybook preview comes from YAML files, which are included in the theme. Emulsify includes a Storybook integration that themers can use as they build a site. This creates a new workflow for our projects. Front-end developers break up the design into component parts and build from the atoms up. Because they are working first in the component library, the component elements can be built before Drupal is set up and without the overhead of starting Drupal. We now have front-end devs who don't touch Drupal, which for some of them is quite exciting, which among other things opens up our ability to engage with talented developers who don't know Drupal. As we know, there are a lot more front-end folks who fit into that category. With the component library, we are also able to QA right away. We publish a version of the component library for our QA and accessibility team members. The workflow for finished components is greatly reduced. So that's why we use Emulsify. It comes with a really great out-of-the-box component library setup and an integration with the component library tool Storybook. I've recently come across Emulsify, but have started contributing to the project. And if you're interested in a deeper dive into Emulsify, I'm giving a presentation along with the Emulsify maintainers from 4 Kitchens on Friday. Jumping back into Drupal, because we've built with a component-driven approach, the components in the Drupal page can typically be moved around without breaking them. Content editors can build out new sections of the site that the designers didn't create designs for, but that still fit together as if they had. The backend implementation is flexible because we're not tied to it. We've been using blocks more frequently lately than paragraphs because they are in core and can be deployed like paragraphs on the node edit form if desired. Paragraphs still currently supports better versioning, but ultimately, who cares? Either way we go in terms of specific Drupal implementations can incorporate the components that we have from our isolated component library. One other element of our strategy is that we try and use consistent view modes across our content types and across projects where possible. The view modes become the representation of the components, typically the card components across fields and the molecule or organism components when we're talking about the view mode for a rendered entity like a content type. If we apply them consistently, we can render any content through the components that we built, and we can use Drupal's other tools like views or panels or other rendering, display suite, etc., other Drupal rendering methodologies that are able to use view modes. One part of that strategy is to try and keep consistent names for media types so that there's little overhead between switching between different content types or rendered entities. We make these components available in Layout Builder, which is now in Drupal core. Layout Builder is our drag and drop solution currently for our customers, and allows content editors to build out sections of the site. Layout Builder can be implemented as a no-code site building tool that retains the features of Drupal-like flexibility, like a flexible content model, revisioning, custom user permissions, and workflows that make Drupal so valuable for larger organizations. So we've packaged a version of what we've discussed in the project, Provus. Provus is a Drupal 9 Kickstarter that packages our components and common content types. By the way, Provus is Middle English for a Middle English word for foresight, which is one of the qualities of Prometheus, who Promet source is named after. We started using Provus as a way to dramatically reduce costs for clients who have projects that have overlapping feature sets. Provus is available on GitHub if you want to give it a test drive. Provus has a relatively simple content model that is good enough for a lot of clients. However, we think of this as a starting point and an attempt to not constrain. Again, we've identified that a flexible content model is a critical feature of Drupal, especially for government. What we are focusing on reusing is our growing component library. This is something that we'd like to make available to all of our sites. There are some organizations that don't want to utilize a drag and drop interface for all of their content and would prefer to keep their sites locked down after design. And almost all organizations have part of the site locked down. We still use these components to build sections of the site in that context because it's more efficient and provides higher quality results. We are currently working on improving our ability to encapsulate these block types, and that's something that we'll be sharing the code for as we do so. So now I'm going to jump over to a quick live demo of Provus and show how we've deployed our block types in Layout Builder to allow folks to drag and drop. Provus out of the box, again, comes with a lot of common site features. We have news, contact web forms, frequently asked questions, lists of people, maps, and events. I'd like to point out that this that our implementation for this event library uses full calendar view. I'm really excited that we've recently put a patch to full calendar view to be able to use the latest version 5 of full calendar. What's really exciting about that for us is that we are that is a much more accessible version of full calendar, and that's something that's really important for us at Promet and is really critical for the types of clients that we like to empower. On the homepage here, we have some test content. We've created a artificial or made up Southport County as just a way of providing some test content. But what you're looking at is some of our common block types and component types that we allow content editors to create, edit, and deploy. If I click Layout Builder, we'll see that drag and drop interface. Instead of starting with this existing version, I'm going to create a new landing page to kind of show us what we're talking about here. I'm going to call this Celebrating Drupal GovCon. I'm not going to add any other elements to the node form because we're going to really use Layout Builder. And when I click Layout, we're back at Layout Builder, and we're going to be able to start to use some of the blocks that we've been talking about. When I click Add Block, I get our current block list. So this page is really about celebrating DrupalCon, and I'm going to start off with a featured page banner, and add some background images. I've loaded some previous Drupal GovCon images at the ready, and I'm gonna go in chronological order here. For my heading, I'm gonna add celebrating Drupal GovCon and add the famous phrase for Drupal, and I'm gonna include that search block. So when I add the block, you can see I've got a live preview, and let's add a couple other elements here on the page. I'm gonna add a frequently asked question, which is another block type. I'm gonna keep the title this time. Let's add a couple of items here. Is Drupal GovCon the best Drupal event? Since we're all here, I'm just gonna say yes for that. I'm gonna add a couple more just so we can see what this looks like. What is the best thing about Drupal GovCon 2020? And I'm gonna add no lines. If you've been to previous events, you might know what I'm talking about. And then I'm gonna add one more just so we can see what that looks like. I'm gonna ask, can I add media? I'm gonna answer yes and add an image. Again, we're looking at the out of the box media gallery. One thing that we're trying to do with our approach is to stay as close as we can to Drupal core. Okay, I'm gonna add that block, and you can see that it's rendered in the live preview. I've decided that actually I want to get a little bit more information above the fold, so I'm going to actually add another section here, this time 2-column. I'm going to drag the FAQ over into this column, and I'm going to add another resource here. This time I'm going to pick our file list. Let's just pretend these are some important resources for Drupal GovCon attendees. I've got a couple display types to choose from. I'm gonna pick a couple documents and throw those in there. And I'm gonna add that block. Great. Now I wanna add a couple more sections. I'm gonna go back to one column, and this time I'm gonna add some news. I'm going to use what we're calling our link group widget, and I want to add some latest news. I'm going to title this latest, and what we have here, this is kind of similar to what the Drupal 7 Beans module was like, if folks were familiar with that. But we have a couple group displays that we can choose from. These are all group displays that we were looking at briefly in Storybook. We set it up so that you can add content manually. We don't have to decide ahead of time whether a certain block is going to be a view or some kind of queue. We can decide that on the fly. I'm going to pick automatic content, which is going to bring in some of the latest content by content type. I'm going to choose news, and I'm going to see what that looks like. Great. So we have a carousel with some great Drupal GovCon news. But you know what? I feel like a carousel is maybe not the right format for that. I'm going to switch to a different layout and add that. And I think I like this a little bit more. But, you know, at the last minute here, I've decided that I don't want, it's not really news that I want, it's events. So I'm going to change the content type to event and update that. And now we have the latest DrupalCon events. Finally, I'm going to add one more block, this time a photo gallery, to really celebrate Drupal GovCon. I'm going to add some photos. I found these off of Flickr. I don't remember. I meant to attribute this correctly, but I don't remember exactly whose stream they were. But these are images from 2016, and I did not see Chris or I on that, but I believe we were both attending. I'm going to select those, and I can move these around, but I like having the this wonderful cake to start off with, and I'm going to add this block. And again, we can see the live preview, and I'm going to come up here and click save. And now we have our new celebrating Drupal GovCon page. So that gives you kind of an idea, and we can see Mona Lisa's there. Everything is as we kind of wanted it to be. So that gives you an idea of how our kind of strategy here comes to fruition in terms of deploying a component library that's consistent across different properties and is responsive to flexible content models, but delivers an elevated drag and drop experience to content editors. So we're not the only folks out there doing this, of course, and there's some other kind of noteworthy projects in the community that are worth highlighting. One is Site Studio, so that's Aqua's product that also uses a atomic design system and is a low to no code solution. One of the kind of disappointing things about Site Studio is that it's not all open source, so there is some vendor lock in there, but it uses a lot of similar approaches, and is I think in some ways trying to has a similar set of goals. Varbase is a really polished Drupal 8/9 distro that has a lot of fully rendered components and kind of drag and drop elements that is also an interesting solution. Drupal Gutenberg brings in the Gutenberg WordPress editor, which is a really great editing experience. One of the, and is what has been built for WordPress. So this is a screenshot of that. And as you can see, it's got some similarities in terms of deploying components on a page level. This project is really strong in terms of the fact that Gutenberg has had so much work into it in terms of polish and the user interface. There's additional code overhead with using the project, but it's definitely something that's an interesting solution in Drupal. So some of the key aspects of Provus in comparison are that we're very close to Drupal core, no vendor lock, and we deliver award-winning designs, or we have a really strong design staff. So some of those, so we don't have kind of like edit the CSS or that kind of thing. I think both Site Studio and Varbase let you manipulate some of the design down to that level, which is a really great solution for some folks, but we really want to emphasize strong design. Again, on the flexible content model and the focus on reusable components, and it's really an early dev. It's really just a Kickstarter, but it brings together some of our strategies, and we wanted to share it with you. And really, I think it's interesting to identify the strengths of Drupal in this sector, have conversations about them, and have skill shares. So that's a big part of why we wanted to present this solution. Here are some resources that are maybe useful if you're wanting to dig down into Drupal theming. The Drupal Twig Slack is highly recommended. If you're interested in Emulsify, the folks there, and the Storybooks and components channels. As I mentioned, this is a list of component-based theming resources, a link to Provus and Emulsify docs. Well, thanks so much. That is the end of our formal presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris and Aaron. Looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to add them there. Looks like I'll start with the most recent one. I think the presentations are being recorded by Drupal GovCon, so those will be available. I'm not sure when, but they will be available. Let's see, can you please share the link to Provus?
Yes, I will do that in the chat right now. It's on the slide, but I'll do that in the chat.
It's also farther up in the chat already. Somebody already posted it.
Yep, I see it. There's a GitHub link. Okay, yeah.
Great.
Just make sure that is the same link, I guess, right? Yep.
That's correct. Thank you, Brooke.
Can you cover any contributed modules you're using with Provus that extend or modify Layout Builder? Good question.
Sure. The user interface on the right that combines the icons with the component types is Layout Builder Browser, which is a really great project. I'm going to click into our composer.json file, and that's going to give us like the rest of the ones that we use. So we have the full calendar, geocode or geofield, and search API and the like.
They're at the top,
But
Aaron. You just passed over the Drupal, the Layout Builder ones.
Mm-hmm.
Lines like 67, 68, 68, right there, yeah.
Yeah, so those are some of the ones that we use, and yeah, probably would be useful to add that to the README. Great question from Judy. Do we kind of lock down the paragraph patterns that are only accessible to certain roles? We have that capacity. We haven't been doing that with just our current clients, but there is a module for that. Layout Builder restrictions that makes that possible. And with Layout Builder Browser in general, we curate the components that are available there in our layout windows you saw through that module. Judy, that's a great. Your question relates to a great point in that we can use that granularity of permissions with Layout Builder, which is obviously really compelling for big organizations.
Looks like there's one from Carlos. How are the created layouts exported between your different environments? That's interesting. Is that configuration or?
So right now, we're highly reliant on config. I almost included that as a slide as kind of a difficulty with kind of reuse because so many of the things that are exported to config are tied to other elements of your site and are just hard to reuse. So the thing that we're really focused on now with the blocks is to take that out of config and have a more code-based solution that's more reusable. As we develop that, that'll be an open source tool, and will be available on our GitHub or Drupal.org.
Okay. Any other questions?
Benji included a great list of some of the layout builder tools. And again, we want to stick close to core because I think that delivers right now the best value for our clients. They're not locked into us. It's easiest to follow the progress that's made around Drupal, and we think right now that that's really the best fit for our goals. And some of the other products that we showed are have much more of their own kind of solution there, and I think that that's a good strategy for certain contexts. But for us, and our clients, we really want to be able to hand them off the project at the end and not have a huge learning curve just around kind of the solution that we've provided.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions you'd like to ask? I don't think so. Okay. Well, thank you, Chris and Aaron. Certainly appreciate it. Very insightful. I don't know that I've seen many great drag and drop solutions for Drupal. So this was great to see.
Thanks.
All right, thanks everybody.
Have a great conference.